No more independent electoral commission in Burkina Faso. On Tuesday, the Transitional Legislative Assembly approved the dissolution of the body, which has been in place for more than 20 years. It formalises a bill adopted in July by the country's military rulers, led by Captain Ibrahim Traoré. Under the new law, the Ministry of Territorial Administration will now be in charge of organising elections.
Something just vanished in Burkina Faso, and almost nobody noticed. Just one quiet vote in Parliament, and a single sentence in the news. The Independent Electoral Commission is gone. But that office wasn't just another government department. For more than 20 years, every president, every candidate, every political party had to pass through it to legally exist. It controlled who could run, who could vote, and whose victory was considered real. Inside that building were the voter databases, the district maps, the certification systems, and the legal stamp that turns numbers into power. Now it has been erased, not reformed, not suspended, completely dissolved. So the real question isn't why it was removed. The real question is far more dangerous. Why would any government delete the one institution that decides who is allowed to rule a country? Was it controlled by foreign powers? Let's find out. For most people, the Electoral Commission sounded boring. A technical body, paperwork, ballot boxes, observers in suits. But in reality, that office was the single most powerful political structure in Burkina Faso. Not the presidency, not parliament, not even the army. That commission decided who exists politically. Before anyone could campaign, they had to be approved by it. Before anyone could win, their results had to be certified by it. Before any president could claim authority, that office had to legally recognize the outcome. Without its stamp, power was invisible. You could seize the palace, control the army, even control the streets. But if the commission didn't validate you, you were officially nobody. This is what most people never understood. The commission didn't just organize elections. It controlled political reality. It owned the voter list, which means it decided who counted as a citizen. It drew the districts, which means it decided which regions mattered more than others. It approved candidates, which means it decided who was allowed to compete at all. And it certified results, which means it decided what version of reality becomes law. In other words, it didn't manage democracy, it was manufactured. That's why for 20 years, every government treated that office like sacred territory. Presidents could fight each other, generals could threaten coups, parties could scream fraud, but nobody touched the commission, because everyone knew whoever controls that office controls the doorway to power itself. Even when coups happened, the irony was brutal. Soldiers could take over the country, but they still needed that institution to make their rule real. Without it, they were just armed men. With it, they became a state. This is why dissolving it is not a normal political decision. You don't casually delete the machine that turns force into legitimacy. You don't destroy the system that decides what counts as lawful authority unless you're planning to replace it with something even stronger. And this is where the story turns dark. Because when the commission existed, it was at least theoretically separate from the government. It could reject candidates. It could delay results. It could challenge outcomes. It was the only institution that could legally embarrass the state. Now it's gone. Which means, for the first time in modern Burkina Faso history, there is no independent body standing between raw power and official truth. No firewall, no buffer. Political reality no longer needs to pass through an external filter. It flows directly from the state itself. So this wasn't about efficiency. It wasn't about saving money. It wasn't even about reform. It was about removing the last institution capable of saying, this is not valid. And once you understand that, the move stops looking administrative and starts looking surgical. Because if that power didn't disappear, it had to go somewhere. So the real question now isn't what was destroyed. It's this. Who inherited the authority to decide what counts as political reality in Burkina Faso? The power didn't vanish when the commission was dissolved. It was transferred. Quietly, legally, and without drama. All of its core functions were moved to the Ministry of Territorial Administration. That name sounds harmless, boring, administrative. But in African politics, this ministry is not a department. It is the spine of the state. This ministry controls the national ID system, which means it knows who exists legally. It controls population registries, which means it knows where everyone lives. It controls local administrators, which means it controls every province, district, and village. It coordinates internal security, which means it controls police movement and internal force. It manages civil records, births, deaths, citizenship, residency. In other words, it already controls the physical map of the nation. Now it also controls the political map. It decides who can register as a candidate, how districts are drawn, how voter lists are built, how votes are organized, and how results are certified. So the same institution that manages territory now manages legitimacy. This is not centralization, this is fusion. The state no longer needs to negotiate with an external body to become real. It produces its own reality from inside its own administrative machinery. Before, power had to pass through a gate. Now, the gate and the state are the same thing. This is what makes the move irreversible. Because once legitimacy is embedded inside the same structure that controls IDs, borders, security, and administration, there is no independent layer left in the system. No place where power can be challenged using the law. Disputes don't go to neutral referees anymore. They go back to the same institution that created the result. It's like appealing a court verdict to the same judge who wrote it. This is why no other ministry was chosen. Not justice, not defense, not parliament. Territorial administration was chosen because it already touches every human being in the country. It already manages the physical existence of citizens. Now it manages their political existence too. So if you are not recognized by this ministry, you are not a citizen. And if you are not validated by this ministry, you are not a political actor. There is no outside, which is why this move is so dangerous and so effective at the same time. Dangerous because it removes any institutional protection against manufactured outcomes. Effective because it eliminates chaos, disputes, and uncertainty. The state becomes self-contained, self-legitimizing, self-certifying. Power no longer needs external confirmation. It becomes a closed system. And this is the real shift nobody is saying out loud. Burkina Faso didn't just remove an independent commission. It internalized political reality itself. The state now controls who exists, who competes, who wins, and who is allowed to complain. Which leads to the most uncomfortable question of all. If the government now controls the entire election machine from top to bottom, what possible reason would it ever have to lose? Traoré didn't dissolve the commission on day one for one simple reason. Because rushing elections in a collapsing country is not democracy, it's theater. When he took power, Burkina Faso wasn't a normal state. Large parts of the territory were unsafe. Villages were under constant threat. The army was overstretched. Foreign troops were still operating on Burkinabe soil. Institutions existed on paper, but the state itself was struggling to function. Holding elections in that environment would have produced one thing only: a foreign certified result with no real authority inside the country. So Traoré made a different calculation. First, secure the territory. Then, rebuild the state. Then, talk about political processes. Instead of prioritizing donor deadlines and international approval, he prioritized basic sovereignty. You don't ask people to vote freely if they can't even move freely. You don't organize national elections if half the nation is living under permanent insecurity. And you don't pretend a commission is independent when the country itself is still dependent. This is why the timeline matters. France was pushed out first because no country can claim democratic independence while hosting foreign troops. New alliances were built because economic and military survival cannot depend on one bloc. The transition was extended because rebuilding a state takes years, not months. Internal command was unified because a divided army produces endless coups. Only after those foundations were laid did the question of elections even make sense. So the commission wasn't removed to lock power. It was removed because the old system belonged to a different reality, one where Burkina Faso existed mainly to satisfy external standards, not internal needs. Traoré's argument, whether people like it or not, is simple. You cannot copy-paste Western democratic models onto a country still fighting for its own survival. Stability is not anti-democracy. It is a precondition for it. And that's the real reason he waited. Not to manipulate outcomes, but to avoid repeating the same mistake Africa has made for decades, rushing into symbolic elections while the state itself remains weak, fragmented, and externally dependent. Which leads to the deeper question that comes next. If the old electoral system was designed for foreign approval instead of national recovery, what kind of election system is Burkina Faso actually trying to build now? Let's pause for a second to say big thank you to the Black Culture Diary community, where Black voices, stories, and legacies are preserved and amplified. By becoming a member, you're not just supporting the channel, you're becoming part of a powerful cultural movement. Let's continue. For years, Burkina Faso's political system was built around satisfying external standards. Elections were judged less by whether they solved national problems and more by whether they pleased international observers. If embassies were satisfied, the process was declared legitimate, even if nothing changed for ordinary people on the ground. Traoré is trying to flip that logic completely. Instead of elections being a performance for the outside world, they are being redesigned as a tool for internal nation building. Not a spectacle for donors, not a ritual for NGOs, but a political process rooted in Burkinabe realities: security, sovereignty, territorial control, and economic survival. This is why the state taking control of the election system isn't framed as censorship inside Burkina Faso. It's framed as ownership. The old system treated elections like a test. Pass the test, get approval. Fail the test, get sanctions. The new system treats elections like a responsibility. First, make the country functional. Then, ask people to participate in shaping it. Under this model, elections are no longer about rotating elites every few years while everything else stays the same. They are about confirming that the state itself is strong enough to sustain political choice without external supervision. In other words, the goal is not to stage elections that look good on paper. The goal is to build elections that make sense in practice. That's why Traoré keeps repeating one idea in different forms: sovereignty before procedures. Because procedures without sovereignty produce fake democracy. But sovereignty with procedures can produce something real. So instead of elections being a risk to national stability, they become a reflection of it. Not a battlefield for foreign interests, but a mirror of domestic power structures. Not a contest over who pleases donors best, but a process shaped by national priorities. This doesn't mean opposition disappears. It means opposition operates inside a system that is no longer designed abroad. It doesn't mean choice disappears. It means choice is anchored in a state that actually exists. And that's the shift Traoré is betting on, that Africans no longer need imported political models to validate themselves. They can build their own, imperfect, evolving, but sovereign. So elections in Burkina Faso are not being abolished. They are being decolonized. Which leads to the next question. If elections are no longer designed to impress the outside world, how will they change the relationship between power and ordinary Burkinabe citizens themselves? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. What's strange is not what the government did. What's strange is the reaction to it. There were no mass protests, no nationwide outrage, no viral campaigns demanding the commission back, no real resistance at all. And this is the part that confuses foreign analysts the most. They keep asking, why are people so calm about losing an independent electoral body? The answer is uncomfortable, because most people had already emotionally divorced from it long before it was dissolved. For years, young Burkinabe watched elections come and go without anything changing in their lives. Different faces, same problems. Insurgency kept spreading. Jobs never arrived. Prices kept rising. Foreign companies kept extracting. Presidents changed, but power felt frozen. So the commission slowly lost its meaning. It became symbolic, a ritual object, something that existed on TV, but not in real life. Gen Z didn't experience it as a source of freedom. They experienced it as a stage prop. They saw politicians campaign, win, and then disappear into the same system. They saw international observers certify results while nothing improved. They saw democracy used as a word, not as a force. So when the commission was removed, it didn't feel like something was taken away. It felt like something already dead was finally buried. and something better was given. That's why there was no emotional shock. People weren't attached to the institution. They were attached to outcomes. And the outcomes under the old system were insecurity, poverty, humiliation, dependency, and endless promises. So when Traoré centralizes power openly, it doesn't feel like betrayal. It feels like clarity. At least now the power structure is visible. There's no pretending that an independent body decides anything. No pretending that elections are neutral. No pretending that foreign-funded institutions represent local will. For Gen Z, this feels less fake. Not more free, not more just, but more honest. They know where power sits now. They know who controls it. They know who to blame if things fail. Under the old system, blame was always scattered. The president blamed the commission blamed the courts blamed the Constitution, and the Constitution blamed donors. Now there is no maze. Power has a face, a location, a chain of command. And psychologically, that matters more than abstract institutions. Because when life is unstable, people prefer visible authority over invisible systems. They prefer control over complexity. They prefer a clear center of power over 1,000 overlapping actors. This is why the emotional reaction isn't resistance. It's curiosity. People aren't asking, is this democratic? They're asking, will this finally work? And that mindset changes everything. Once a population stops measuring politics by procedures and starts measuring it by results, institutions lose their sacred status. They become tools, disposable tools. If something doesn't produce security, dignity, or improvement, it loses emotional legitimacy, no matter how democratic it looks on paper. So the commission didn't fall because people hated it. It fell because people stopped believing it mattered, which leads to the most dangerous psychological shift of all. If people no longer believe elections can change anything, and no longer feel attached to electoral institutions, then what exactly are they expecting politics to deliver instead? This is where the story changes completely, because power in Burkina Faso is no longer being designed around procedural exit. It's being designed around performance-based legitimacy. Under the old system, leadership changed mainly through formal rituals, elections every few years, international observers, and legal transfers of power that looked clean on paper. But in reality, those exits didn't mean much. Governments rotated, but the structure stayed the same. Poverty stayed, insecurity stayed, foreign influence stayed. So the question Traoré is really asking is not how do leaders leave? It's why should leaders stay if they fail? In this new model, the exit is no longer just a ballot. The exit is results. If the state delivers security, territorial control, economic recovery, dignity, sovereignty, then leadership retains legitimacy. But if it fails to deliver those things, legitimacy collapses, not legally, but socially. People withdraw support. The narrative shifts. The symbolic authority dissolves. This is not about trapping power. It's about tying power to performance. Instead of leaders surviving because they won a procedural contest 5 years ago, they survive because people feel their lives are improving now. That's a much harsher standard, because ballots can be manipulated. But lived reality cannot. You can fake an election. You cannot fake security in villages. You cannot fake food prices. You cannot fake jobs. You cannot fake national pride. So in this system, elections don't disappear. They transform. They become a measurement of trust, a signal of mood, a test of loyalty, a mirror of reality. Not the only source of legitimacy, but one part of a much bigger equation. And that's the deeper shift Burkina Faso is making. Power no longer depends on international permission. It depends on domestic performance, not on what observers say, on what citizens experience, which means the real risk for Traoré is not losing an election. The real risk is failing to deliver results. And in a population that has already lost patience with symbolic politics, failure won't be forgiven quietly. So Burkina Faso hasn't eliminated political exit. It has simply changed its form. From vote every few years and hope, to deliver every day or lose credibility. And that leads to the final question that defines this entire new system. In a model where legitimacy comes from performance instead of permission, How long can any leader survive without real, visible change? Let us know in the comments section. Did Traoré do the right thing? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.